He's caped, cowed, and the coolest superhero of them all. Because underneath that batsuit, Batman only has his human strength and intellect to rely on. That and the greatest arsenal of crime-fighting weaponry ever devised.
Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
But just where does comic book science fiction end and scientific fact begin?
All of the tools have some credible basis in scientific reality.
What technologies are behind the gadgets in Batman's utility belt? And just how plausible is the Batmobile?
These machines now, they do really work.
Get ready for a real-life trip to the Batcave as we reveal the secrets behind Batman tech. His name is known to comic book fans and film-going audiences around the world.
I'm Batman.
But Batman isn't just your average, everyday crime-fighting superhero.
Taste of your own medicine, Doctor.
He's also a multi-billionaire who can afford to outfit himself with the very latest in high-tech wizardry.
The technology of Batman is important to the character because he doesn't have superpowers, and so the technology he employs, which he's able to finance through his great wealth and through his company, give him the advantage that he needs to fight crime.
Batman invents out of necessity.
Problem with the graphite, sir. The next 10,000 will be up to specifications.
When he finds something that's lacking in his arsenal of technology, he'll go out and try to find a solution for it. So, in a certain sense, you could say it's limitless.
Since his very first appearance in the pages of Detective Comics, Batman has used the iconography of a bat to strike fear into the hearts of Gotham City's most notorious arch-criminals.
Where are you?
Here. But unlike many other superheroes who have gene-altered gifts or possess out-of-this-world superpowers, Batman must rely on science to give him an edge over his enemies.
Well, he has to use technology in order to solve crimes and capture criminals. Other superheroes just use their superpowers. Batman relied on skill and technical knowledge.
Now, you couldn't really grow up to be Superman, but if you're really cool and really dedicated and really focused, you could become the Batman.
Bruce Wayne, of course, is a billionaire. He can have the cutting-edge technology he wants. Doesn't matter what kind of materials he wants to buy. And he's got the best people in the world working for him.
Well, what is it today?
One of the great things about Batman is that he has access to Lucius Fox and his department where they come up with all these amazing gadgets.
As envisioned by comic book creator Bob Kane in 1939, Batman was originally more of a super sleuth than a superhero. In fact, his first crime-fighting gadgets were not much more sophisticated than standard lockpicks, passkeys, and an occasional glass cutter.
He was always on the cutting edge, but, you know, picks and cutters were probably the cutting edge in 1939.
Much of the early stories, it was really the technology of convenience. It was what people knew. Comic books were written for kids in the early days. They assumed the audience was 10 to 12 years old at best, and they weren't worried about addressing the technology of the time because they didn't figure the kids understood the technology at the time.
There were smoke pellets, gas bombs, things along those lines enabled to disable or confuse. These are the traditional weapons that Batman's able to pull out in order to achieve what he needs to achieve.
But there was one weapon Batman refused to carry for nearly all of his crime-fighting history: a gun.
He didn't carry a gun for very long because somebody quickly realized it was contrary to who and what he was. Here's a character whose parents had been killed by guns. A gun was anathema to him. It was something he really didn't want to touch. It was what had made him who he was. And it's much more heroic to solve the problem without simply being able to shoot the villain, but having to use your wits and your other abilities.
Instead of packing heat, Bruce Wayne relied on other, more innovative crime-fighting methods. methods that became increasingly sophisticated over the years. In 1940, for example, Batman used infrared night vision goggles, a technology being developed at the time by the U.S. Navy.
Night vision is heat vision, is literally what it is. If you think about light, everyone's familiar with the spectrum of the rainbow, the red, yellow, green, blue. There's also different spectrums that we can't see. And infrared is what we refer to when we're talking about the type of radiation you get from heat. So any hot body will emit this type of radiation, and you can design cameras to detect it. And so night vision is basically looking at that wavelength of light. Batman has lots of gadgets, but Batman's great thing was that many of them are all small enough to fit in his utility belt. And making things small can be a challenge, but it's not technologically impossible, and that's driving a lot of technology these days, is how can we make things smaller and smaller and still function the way we want them to.
One early gadget Batman had in his utility belt was a miniature camera. The device was inspired by the ones actually being used by spies in the years prior to Batman's debut.
Clandestine photography goes back into the 1930s with the commercial Minox camera. This was a camera that was invented in 1934 by a Latvian engineer by the name of Walter Zapp. His idea for the camera was a camera that could be held in one hand, but if you're not very dexterous with this camera, it does take two hands to cycle the film. In the commercial world, that's not an issue, but in our world, that draws attention, and we don't like that. Our challenge is to make a camera that can be easily concealed in one hand, small enough that it can be easily palmed. We want to be able to easily manipulate it with one hand, and while we're at it, we're CIA, we're always going to try to process improve. We're going to make ours take twice as many shots. This is the camera that did it. This is the agency's first sub-miniature document copy camera. A camera like this is like one Batman might have in his utility belt.
In the late 1940s and early 50s, as the world entered the atomic age, Batman's use of real science literally rocketed into the realm of science fiction.
In the 50s, a lot of the fiction was very science fiction based. So, you know, Batman had ray guns. They flew in spaceships and things like that. It was just reflective of the times.
In Batman number 109, the Caped Crusader used a heat ray to detonate explosives floating in Gotham City Harbor. It seemed far-fetched at the time, and was. But believe it or not, the US military is currently working on just such a device to add to its arsenal.
A heat ray is a low-frequency infrared kind of light, and the Army today is developing weapons based on heat rays, much like the one that Batman used.
Called the Active Denial System, this non-lethal weapon directs high-frequency microwaves over distances up to 550 yards.
Roger, I'm ready for a 100% shot, 3 seconds on the CLT.
Its heat ray is about as hot as a light bulb and can penetrate the clothing of aggressors without seriously harming them.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
As the 1960s ushered in technology that fueled the space race, Batman stayed a step ahead with advances of his own.
In the 60s, as computer systems, mainframes came into play, then people began to catch on to computerization. Batman had databases in the Batcave.
The first visible manifestation I saw of what a computer could be was the use of that technology on Batman. I think that was true probably for millions of kids. And maybe I was inclined to be a technology geek and learn how to do the programming in the early years because of it.
By the time the 90s came around, his computer systems were so sophisticated that he could tap into the law enforcement networks and keep on top of crime.
In today's world of GPS and cellular communications, the line between science fiction and science fact is getting thinner than ever.
You want his science to be based upon something that is real technology as well. So therefore, it doesn't break the conceit that you can be Batman and Batman can exist in our world.
In movie incarnations like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, Batman's weapons and gadgets have to stand up to ever-increasing scrutiny from audiences.
All of the tools that he uses, therefore, have to have some credible basis in scientific reality. We really wanted to sort of address from the point of view of, yes, if you had limitless financial resources, could you focus that and apply that to creating some very extraordinary, useful crime-fighting techniques?
In the Chris Nolan vision of Batman, everything has what I call a hyper-reality basis to it. So in the area of technology, Bruce Wayne and Batman would always take things and convert them from what we today would think is part of the real world.
But as Batman's arsenal must meet the demands of 21st century technology, so too must his basic equipment, and that includes the most sensational suit ever worn by a caped crime fighter.
Guy dresses up like a bat clearly has issues.
It's the costume that transformed Bruce Wayne, would-be crime fighter, into an icon of heroism, justice, and strength. The Batsuit. The Batsuit has been a key part of its owner's mystique from the very beginning, but it wasn't always a source of protection.
It starts as a symbol, a creature of the night, something to terrify. It's designed to make you A, anonymous, B, more than human all at the same time.
Originally, Batman's suit was made of cloth. It could be easily torn and didn't include any special technology.
The first evolution of the Batman suit takes place in the late 1950s. The editors felt that strange, weird new looks were part of how to sell the story. You would do stories like Undersea Batman, where there would be a special Batman costume just for going underwater. And that began the introduction of the suit as technology.
Given the weaponry that he's facing and the situations he's created, you have to believe he needs more in his arsenal in order to combat the greater threat that he keeps on facing.
The whole idea of it becoming essentially a suit of armor evolved over the years.
The inspiration for some of the technology of the Batsuit was almost accidental. When DC artists added a yellow circle to the suit, one that looked like a bullseye, writers were inspired to add a new aspect to the outfit.
When they started addressing the question of it being a bullseye, they took that opportunity to go, well, yeah, okay, then it is a bullseye. He wears Kevlar behind that section of the costume, hoping that criminals will actually fire at that, and it's bulletproof. Well, once you start doing that, the next logical question is, well, if you're going to wear Kevlar there, why aren't you wearing Kevlar under the entire costume?
Kevlar bi-weave, reinforced joints.
Tear-resistant.
This sucker will stop a knife.
Bulletproof.
Anything but a straight shot.
Kevlar's cool. It's 5 times stronger than steel, and when woven in layers, like 3 to 7 layers, it will protect the body.
Developed by DuPont in 1965, Kevlar material gets its life-saving properties from the unique way its synthetic fibers are woven.
In Kevlar, you have a bunch of fibers that are interweaved with each other, and so as they get hit, they actually stretch. The individual threads are fighting against each other, and it can resist very large impacts and high-speed bullets without actually breaking. So if you have a suit made of Kevlar, and you want to know how close you can be to someone who's shooting at you, interesting question is less the range than the actual size of the bullet and the speed. And Kevlar vests can cover a wide range, and most, hand pistols and even some shotguns, Batman would be very safe against, even up at close range.
In The Dark Knight, Batman's Kevlar suit gets an upgrade to the next level in defensive gear.
I'd been looking for the story reasons for redesigning the suit, and then it occurred to me it's actually very simple. We just would have it be the real reason we did redesign it, which is he wants to be able to move faster and more flexibly. That's what we put into the story.
Hardened Kevlar plates over titanium-dipped tri-weave fibers for flexibility. It'll be lighter, faster, more agile. Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
We collected together, read about and looked at all these sort of Under Armour suits, what the Army use. So we just set about redesigning the suit. We see that it's made up of much more facets, like a suit of armor.
The separate plates of armor of the new Batsuit are anchored on an elastic mesh.
It's 110 components to this suit. We decided that smaller armored plates would allow a crumple zone between those armored plates and allow him more movement.
The Batsuit's flexible, armor-plated design parallels an actual technology called ceramic armor, made by companies like Ceradyne Incorporated in Costa Mesa, California. Their ceramic plating has the resistance of steel, the material that's long been used to stop bullets. But ceramic plating is 70% lighter.
To stop the bullet, you have to break the bullet. Therefore, you need something that is harder than the bullet. The lightest weight, hardest material known to man for these types of applications is known as boron carbide.
Boron carbide is a black crystalline powder. When heated to extreme temperatures and formed into ceramic plating, it becomes nearly as hard as diamonds.
So where you are right now are in the hot pressing area. This is where we take a powder and we make it into the lightest, hardest material known to man.
Transforming the particles into armor begins by pouring the powder into forms and then compressing the material. The armor molds are then put into a hot press.
And behind me, you can see the hot presses. These are induction heated and they operate at temperatures close to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
The plates are then cooled, but they're not safe to be used as armor yet.
On certain high impacts, ceramic armor plating still will shatter. But that's actually a benefit because it really dissipates the energy into the shattering of the material instead of your body.
But shards of shattered ceramic plating can still be deadly if they enter the body. To prevent this lethal possibility, a special resin is fused to the back of each piece of armor to catch the broken shards.
The final step is we have to put out an outer layer. The outer layer is called the spall shield. So when a bullet comes in, not only do you stop it and catch the fragments in the back, but there may be a little bit that tends to fly in the wrong direction. This will stop it.
Armored protection, like Batman has in his suit, is essential to military personnel around the world. As shown in this video, taken by an enemy sniper, ceramic plating can be a soldier's best defense when under attack. The shot was aimed at the soldier's heart, but he survived thanks to his body armor.
Development of the Ceradyne armor has resulted in thousands of lives being saved. You can hold the muzzle up against a guy's chest and pull the trigger, and we'll stop that bullet.
For my opinion, you need to lighten up.
Batman can not only take a bullet, he can also literally take the heat. Thanks to the fact that his suit is made of the real fireproof material known as Nomex.
Nomex is used in firefighters' uniforms. Welders can wear it. Racing car drivers can wear it. Anyone who's at chance of being near a high flame situation or an explosion.
When exposed to flame, regular cotton fabric ignites instantly. But clothing made of Nomex doesn't burn.
It doesn't catch on fire, it doesn't melt, and it doesn't do any of the horrible things you think of when you're in fire, so that you can withstand fires for minutes without melting, burning, or igniting.
Nomex is a fiber with built-in flame resistance. When exposed to intense heat, the fibers carbonize and become thicker, creating a protective barrier between the suit and a person's skin.
Batman can basically walk through flames with this material, and the only thing he'll feel really is the heat. And if Batman rolls and falls and gets the fire out within a few minutes, he's certainly going to be fine.
One of the essential parts of any superhero's suit is his cape, and Batman is no exception. But his cape benefits from a blend of real-life tech and the type only found in the labs of Wayne Enterprises.
Do you have any lightweight fabrics?
You know, I think I have just the thing. It's called memory cloth. Notice anything? Molecules realign, becomes rigid.
What kind of shapes can you make?
Can be tailored to fit in any structure based on a rigid skeleton.
On first glance, the fantastic fabric seems like, well, a fabrication. But surprisingly, scientists say material with memory is in the works, and someday, items like Batman's amazing cape may become solid objects with the help of magnetism.
One that's been under active development is something called magnetorheological fluids. You have a fluid with little particles in it that when you apply magnetic fields, they all line up and they become very, very stiff. The problem is the amount they move is very small. So you would need a lot of them to have any sort of effect on your cloth. But it is not something that's technologically impossible. It's just something we haven't figured out how to do completely yet.
Okay, so let's say Batman's cape can harden into a wing. That doesn't mean he can automatically conquer the challenges of flight. Even real bats have difficulty accomplishing the feat.
Bats are not very effective flyers. They're excellent gliders. The energetics involved in bat flight is really quite high. They're not particularly graceful.
But Batman's method of flight doesn't involve the flapping motions used by real bats.
If you look at the Batman films closely, you will find that he starts from a high location and gets to a low altitude through the use of his cape. And in this regard, the cape really is not a flight mechanism, but more of a gliding mechanism.
If you have figured out how to make the memory fabric in this cape, it can give you the necessary lift to at least glide and float for some distance. The challenges you have to figure out are how to get enough lift to travel the distance he wants to do. It's the speed that he moves forward with that's key. So he might do it by falling enough distance and let gravity speed him up. And for that, he'd need to come from a high enough building.
Believe it or not, people can actually glide like the Caped Crusader. In our world, we may not have Batman's transforming cape, but we do have something similar. Wingsuits.
The way this thing works is there's a slit right here. Air goes in the arms and fills up the suit. Actually, this whole entire suit is one big wing. The whole entire thing fills up with air, and that's kind of what helps you fly. You're not just controlled falling anymore.
So a wingsuit works basically the same way that we expect Batman's cape to work. You have the fabric shaped between your arms and your body and your legs in a way that gives you an airfoil type effect, a wing-like effect that generates lift as you move forward through the air. But if you look at the way they use wingsuits, you can tell that there's some dangers there in terms of the way Batman uses his cape, is most of the people using a wingsuit also have a parachute for the last bit to get them down to the ground safely.
Of course, not all of Batman's technological tricks are in his suit. For others, you have to look closer. Inside the most mysterious and versatile toolbox in superhero history, the utility belt. Of all the technologies Batman uses, there's one that's gotten him out of more tight spots than any other, his utility belt.
Hasn't every kid who read these comic books had a utility belt? Didn't you have a utility belt when you were a kid?
Batman's gadget-packed wonder is not unlike kits used by counterintelligence crime fighters, though Batman's belt is more compact.
Batman used the technology that was available to him at the time. Our traveling technical officers do the same thing. They carry a small kit with commercially available items. The kit even contains lock-picking devices, just like Batman's, but ours requires special membership and ID.
Over the years, Batman's utility belt has contained scores of gadgets. Some of them more far-fetched than others.
I always thought the rebreather was very cool. A rebreather is something that you sort of fit in your mouth and allows you to breathe underwater for a short period of time, longer than you could by holding your breath.
But many of Batman's gadgets are based in real technology. Take, for instance, his flexible fiber optic periscope.
Fiber optics are very common materials now. You can see them in a lot of kid toys. They're the nice little glass fibers at the end that shine the lights out the end. And basically what you do is bend light. Then as the light tries to bounce out of the tube, it actually reflects back in. We call this total internal reflection. The light stays inside the device. Even if you bend it through a fairly sharp angle or curve, it's the properties of the material it's made out of that keeps the light inside the fiber. And so you can take this periscope made out of fiber optics and bend it around corners and twist it around as much as you need to get where you want to look, and the light coming in one end will come out the other, and you can see what you're looking at.
It's you, isn't it? The other kids won't believe me.
Of course, other tools in Batman's belt are more lethal. His thermite bombs work like hand grenades do.
What Batman would be very successful at is getting through doors, windows.
A more unusual weapon is Batman's signature batarang, the Dark Knight's version of a boomerang.
The batarang was always my favorite. I always thought that was the coolest. Every kid in their own home is sitting there trying to build their own batarang and see if they work.
Each arm of a real boomerang is contoured like an airplane wing. When thrown, the rotating airfoils help give the device lift, similar to the way propellers lift a helicopter. A boomerang circles back to its launching point due to gyroscopic precession, a phenomenon that causes a spinning object to maintain its axis and direction as it rotates. Some of Batman's batarangs have similar aerodynamics, but others, outfitted with cumbersome items like flashbulbs, cameras, police whistles, and bombs, might have more trouble getting off the ground. In Batman Begins, the batarang was entirely reconceptualized as a martial arts style throwing star.
The batarang was a very early piece of equipment of Batman's, and we felt it was very important to sort of make that part of his belt, but it had to be a very high-tech version of it, so it's smaller, but it's still a pretty lethal weapon.
But the most famous use of the batarang in the comics is as a grappling tool, a device that has now evolved into a grappling gun. And like many others, this technology is anchored solidly in science.
To have the grappling hook reach the top of the building, this is relatively easy. You're not looking at, I think, anything more powerful than some very simple spring-loaded guns, air guns, compressor things that you could easily imagine in the size of the handgun.
Batman's grappling system also packs enough power to lift the Dark Knight off the ground and into the air in mere seconds. That much liftoff would take a powerful motorized mechanism, one that factors in both Batman's weight and speed of travel.
If you look in the movie and estimate the speeds he's going up, you're looking at a power that's around 5,000 watts. To put that in perspective, typical light bulbs are 60 or 100 watts, so you're talking, maybe 50 times the power in a standard light bulb. That might sound like a lot, but it's not too bad. You can actually generate that power, and in fact, people have made devices that can pull people up.
One of those devices is the Atlas-powered rope ascender, used by the U.S. Army.
The Atlas is really similar in a lot of ways to what Batman's using right out of the comic book or the movies. The system is designed to pull a very large load up a rope extremely quickly. It's great for rapid escape, search and rescue, all sorts of things that Batman's actually doing.
The Atlas also lets its user do a controlled descent down the side of a building or mountain. And its mechanism is relatively simple.
It's a lot like a capstan winch on a sailboat. And the capstan basically gives you a very strong circumferential grip around something round when you apply a load to the rope. To engage the rope, you simply wrap it around that capstan winch mechanism in the device, close the lid, and pull the trigger. To operate it, it's like a portable drill, variable speed trigger. You pull the trigger more, you're going to go up faster.
Built for combat search and rescue and other vertical tactical operations, the Atlas can swiftly lift over 500 pounds. So just like Batman's grappling system, carrying two people isn't a problem.
A fully loaded soldier is always going to weigh at least about 300 pounds. In the infantry, the lightest pack load that men have is about 75 pounds. From there on, it only gets heavier. So we want to be able to accommodate a soldier and a fully loaded pack at all times. Additionally, if you need to use this device for rescue, it makes it so that you can clip yourself and an additional person in and lift them both at the same time. We built more like a truck that's for vertical operations. So this system's rugged, it can be used a lot, it's got very long battery life, and can lift a very high load repeatedly. So this is more of a utilitarian system than what Batman actually has.
Batman's utility belt may be the ultimate in compact crime fighting, but the Caped Crusader doesn't always think small. And Batman tech doesn't get any bigger or cooler than an automobile that's become a pop culture icon.
At least tell me what it looks like. Never mind.
What's that? Well, the tumbler? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that.
Since 1941, Batman has cruised the streets of Gotham City in a car that pays flashy tribute to his nocturnal namesake. But whether it's got scalloped fins, a bat's head battering ram, or a jet-propelled engine, the Batmobile may be the most coveted item in all Batman tech.
I think the Batmobile had a major influence on me. I mean, I was fascinated by it. I wanted to drive it, I wanted to see it, and I think it kind of got me into cars at an early age that way.
Artists and writers have kept improving on the Batmobile's design, with additions and overhauls reflecting car trends of the day.
The ever-changing Batmobile. You know, you see a different Batmobile for every year. You see a different Batmobile for every generation. In the 40s, you had the big grille, which was kind of cool.
The first Batmobile I remember was the Batmobile of the 50s with the huge bat fin on the back and the bat-headed battering ram in the front. It was big enough to be a tank. Then he got into the 60s and the car evolved to match the one in the television series with the atomic turbines. Then in the early 70s, it became a sports car. I always thought that was the coolest. I mean, the whole idea that this singular, unique vehicle belongs to a singular, unique character.
So what do you think? Does it come in black?
As Batman's enemies got tougher, so did his car.
Make a color?
It's a black tank.
And no retooling of the Batmobile was more radical than the one showcased in Batman Begins.
Hold on.
Director Christopher Nolan and designer Nathan Crowley set out to create a 21st century ride. One whose practicality and power would help set the tone for the entire film.
The purpose of redesigning the Batmobile, which we call the Tumbler, was to have it have capabilities that we felt a crime fighter would need to have in the modern day.
The Tumbler, that was the first thing we designed, because I felt that if we could show the studio what the Batmobile was in our world, they'd get a handle on what everything else would be.
Action!
I felt that we needed a new contemporary approach in order to believe in the utility of this vehicle. So what I proposed was a cross between a Lamborghini and a Humvee, something that would have the presence of almost a tank-like vehicle, but also with the speed and grace of a sports car.
She was built as a bridging vehicle. During combat, 2 of these would jump over a river towing cables.
So by definition, it needed to have a jet engine in it to allow it to jump over rivers or whatever in order to take the equipment across. It needed to have armor to protect it from taking hits. Also has the ability to drive in a stealth mode with an engine that's incredibly quiet, so it can sort of disappear into the environment.
I lost him. We lost visual.
It's a pretty cool piece of equipment.
The Tumbler seems surprisingly realistic, but how much of it would actually work? Let's start with the aerodynamics. In spite of its weight of about 5,000 pounds, the Tumbler can achieve impressive speed.
The Tumbler is a big, bulky, tank-like machine, but probably can go about 120, 130 miles an hour.
Credit goes to its surprisingly sleek design. Just as airplane flaps generate lift to make a plane go up, the Tumbler uses flaps to push the vehicle down and achieve greater velocity.
The theory behind it is that it's got all these little aerofoils on the outside that all make tiny little wings. Instead of having one big as an aircraft.
The other key aerodynamic element, surprisingly, is the airflow under the car. And this is actually what racing cars use. If you can design that air under the car to go significantly faster than the air on the top of the car, you get low pressure under the car, and the high pressure on top pushes you down on the ground. So if you want to understand how the Tumbler gains stability by having the air blow underneath it, you can just take a piece of paper. You can generate high pressure on top and a low pressure underneath by blowing under the paper, and the paper will be forced down.
Speed is one thing, but how does something as large as the Tumbler manage to maneuver so well?
Weight does have a great effect on maneuverability. You have all this mass you have to move around. It's transmitted through the wheels and tires to the road. Really, you got to hand it to the designers, automotive-wise. It's quite a feat of engineering. They seem to have each wheel is kind of balanced out by itself without an axle running across the middle.
Both wheels are totally independent, so one wheel can actually stop, and the other wheel can rotate so the thing turns right on a dime. And it can do that at any speed. That's what's so amazing about it.
I gotta get me one of those.
The Tumbler is designed to get some of its momentum from a jet-powered engine. Another detail rooted in reality. Jet-powered cars have been used to set land speed records, and they've even made brief trips into the consumer world.
They've tried to use jet engines in cars throughout history. 1963, Chrysler introduced the turbine car. 50 models they made had a jet engine in it. They only gave them to about 200 customers for 3 months each. It was a very experimental program. Most people who drove it loved it. Unfortunately, the car wasn't great on gas mileage. It's a very complicated car, and it kind of died a few years later.
Over here on the throttle, flip that open and throttle up. This will boost you into a rampless jump. Right now!
On screen, the Tumbler can also make unassisted or rampless jumps.
If it comes off perfectly parallel to the ground, it's always going to fall a little bit. And so if it's jumping to something that's a little bit lower, it's okay. If it wants to jump to something at the same height or higher, it needs some form of lift, or it needs to come off at a slight angle. The way you could do this is imagine a little bit of a wheelie as you take off. You don't actually need a ramp to get a little bit of vertical velocity, especially since you've got the jet engine on the back to give you that extra thrust. You just get the front end of the car up a little bit, fire your jet engine, and now you're going off at an angle.
You know, we were confident that we could do some pretty amazing jumps and it land and drive off, you know, not the classic thing where the car jumps, lands, falls apart, and then you cut and put another car in and drive away. You know, we were proud of the fact that we could do all that and still carry on the sequence.
If you had powerful enough hydraulics or electromagnetic shots up front, and then you had a very powerful jet engine that aimed down a little bit, you might be able to get enough of a leaping effect to go 10, 20, 30 feet in the air.
The real danger is the landing. He's going to be landing at a very high speed. So the front end of the car has to have the stability and the shock system to survive that jump. And in fact, if you look closely, the Batmobile does some interesting thing. The front wheels extend, there's extra shock absorbers there, and when it hits the ground, it slows down over that longer distance that enables it to survive the impact.
The Batmobile Tumbler is certainly impressive, but the tech team at Wayne Enterprises isn't resting on its automotive laurels. These days, Batman's got a new and even more outrageous way to navigate the mean streets of Gotham City.
Will you be wanting the Batpod, sir?
In the middle of the day, Alfred? Not very subtle.
The Lamborghini, then. Much more subtle.
Over the years, Batman has used his technological know-how to create countless vehicles to help him fight enemies like the Joker. He's had bat planes, bat boats, bat copters, and even a vehicle that could go from the air to under the sea. 3 years after Batman Begins, its sequel, The Dark Knight, pushed Batman tech even further.
One of the joys of working on a character who's been around for thousands of stories is you have to continually ask, how do I top this?
The answer? The Batpod, a bold new vehicle that's part motorcycle and part lethal weapon.
It's something which looks like some crazy Vikings idea of a customized motorbike. It looks formidable, and like everything with the movie, it works.
It looks raw and it looks very extreme. It looks really powerful and dangerous. So I think that is it's sort of the bad boy, you know?
The task, as usual, was to build something that could really go fast, make turns, you know, the usual outrageous, you know, parameters. It really had to belong to the same family as the Batmobile, so that's where we started.
I hesitate to even call this a motorcycle just because it's so different from the way a motorcycle typically handles. I mean, there isn't really a seat. You're lying down on your belly and your legs are splayed apart 3.5 feet.
Riding the Batpod in a practically prone position gives the Dark Knight an aerodynamic edge. The low-profile technique is frequently used by professional racers.
Grand Prix motorcycle racers, whenever they get a chance, whenever they're on a straightaway, they duck down and they make themselves as small as possible, and it's that aerodynamic drag they're trying to eliminate. When Batman is down on the Batpod in that position, he's eliminating drag and he's a lot less exposed, and he's also lowering the center of gravity, so he has more control over the vehicle.
The Batpod weighs about 700 pounds. Because it's so large, controlling the bike takes extra skill, including the use of special handlebars, which act as arm shields.
The steering of it was totally unconventional. You had these big cowls that came around his arms that he was more from his shoulder, actually, that he steered.
Well, you want to use more of your body weight to turn a bike, and on this you're gonna, I think that if you're not just using your arms and your hands placed on a handlebar, but you've got this action so that you're in these arm shields that help you sort of lean the bike in, that's gonna help you maneuver it. So that you're really forced to use your body weight to control it as opposed to just arms, because you'd have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in order to be able to turn that kind of tire on a motorcycle.
Besides the way it's steered, the Batpod is also unique in the way it's propelled.
Well, the thing that strikes me the most about this is that where you would expect the motor to be, it doesn't exist. It's not in the middle of the bike.
A standard motorcycle has a single engine in the center of the vehicle. On screen, the Batpod is intended to have not one, but two engines. And amazingly, one is tucked inside the hub of the bike's front wheel, and the other inside the back wheel.
Putting the engines inside the wheels is being worked on actually by a number of companies right now.
In 2003, a Swiss engineering team developed a 160 horsepower engine mounted inside 22-inch car tires. Known as independent wheel drive, the technology can also be used in motorcycles, though it works best when the engine is in just one wheel of the bike.
The disadvantage to having an engine in both the wheels is that they have to be synchronized some way. Otherwise, if one's spinning faster than the other, of course, one's trying to push you too fast or the other one's trying to pull you too fast, they would have to have computer control. This is something Batman, of course, can afford, and he would have his perfectly synchronized, and that way he's got great traction because he's got engine putting power down and back, engine putting power down in front, all synchronized, he's good to go.
Today, thanks to scientists and engineers who've been inspired by the gadgets in the Dark Knight's world, Batman's technology is no longer just fantasy.
And I think much of the technology that comes out of Batman comes out of people who were fans, who are now scientists, inventors, designers.
If you're a kid watching this stuff or reading about it, it makes you want to go out there and try to make things yourself.
It's a seamless loop. The changes in the real world inspire the writers, and the writers and the artists in turn inspire the scientists and the engineers to dream.
I've seen now what I have to become to stop men like him.
From high-speed Batmobiles to fast-flying Batarang blades, and from armor-plated batsuits to supercharged grappling guns, Batman has set the standard for superhero tech.
What I love about Batman is the sense that these things really are possible. I think that makes him much more relatable because Batman's very much a human being. He embodies that fantasy of a man who, through sheer self-discipline, turned himself into a heroic figure. I think that's just a very compelling myth.
I never said thank you, and you'll never have to.
The accessibility of Batman is because you don't have to be rocketed from another planet or have strange powers. All you have to be is the top of your physical ability and top of what your mind can achieve. And in doing so, you can become Batman.
He has become a legend, a victim of tragedy, who emerges as a symbol of justice.
What the hell are you?
What drives a billionaire to become a crime-fighting vigilante?
You got an angry man in pain, seeking purpose in his life.
And how do Batman's motivations reflect our own?
He is struggling with the very things that you and I struggle with every day.
Now, go inside the mind of a superhero.
His whole life is a quest to restore meaning.
As we use the real-life tools of analysis.
There's a technique for people who have fears. It's called exposure.
To unlock the psyche of Bruce Wayne, Batman, and the villains who symbolize our darkest desires.
I am gonna stop you.
You're just a freak, like me.
Hero. Batman is as complex as he is contradictory.
Bruce.
Rachel's told me everything about you.
I certainly hope not.
Exploring his character can be a revealing test for the viewer. Because in Batman, we can find the heroism, the fear, and the darkness inside us all. The brainchild of creator Bob Kane, Batman debuted in the pages of Detective Comics in 1939. It was the decade of the Great Depression, urban expansion, and violent crime. Since then, billionaire Bruce Wayne and his masked alter ego have been shown as everything from a mob-crushing crime fighter to a kid-friendly superhero. But by the end of the 20th century, Batman had taken on a darker, grittier, and more realistic tone, as writers and filmmakers began adding layers of psychological motivation. In the 2005 motion picture Batman Begins, one of the keys to understanding Batman's psychology lies in a universal emotion: fear. In the film, young Bruce Wayne develops a paralyzing fear of bats.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Fear is one of the fundamental psychologies of childhood, and learning how to deal with the fact that we will be afraid, but we will go on to do things despite our fears.
You know why they attacked you, don't you? They were afraid of you.
Afraid of me?
All creatures feel fear,
Even the scary ones.
especially the scary ones.
One of the interesting things about Batman Begins is it gave us a little more glimpse into the young Bruce Wayne. He tends to be a fearful and anxious kid, which is a very interesting choice in temperament to give him. It's almost like he's starting to have a panic attack in the play where it's a callback to the bats when he fell in the bat cave.
Can we go?
He causes his parents to leave the theater because he gets really anxious.
Please.
Let's go.
Central to the Batman mythology is the notion of choice. That's very, very central to everything. The Batman stories portray the alternatives of good and evil, life or death. In Bruce Wayne's case, he was confronted with the most horrible tragedy one could imagine.
Wallace, Joey, I'm fast. That's fine. Here you go.
Bruce Wayne is a very plausible character psychologically. Kids generally, even if they're not directly responsible for some terrible event, generally personalize the event and take responsibility for it.
Don't be afraid.
He feels guilty because his fear caused them to go into this dark alley, and they died as a result of it.
The death of Bruce Wayne's parents is an integral part of the Batman mythology and was first depicted in the November 1939 issue of Detective Comics. It has continued to be incorporated into almost every telling and retelling of his early history.
Here's a kid who, at a very early age, learned that security is temporary, is fragile.
It was my fault, Alfred. I made them leave the theater. If I hadn't gotten scared.
It was nothing that you did. It was him.
It raises a question, which is, am I ever going to be secure? Can I ever trust anybody who won't also be taken away?
I miss him, Alfred.
And Bruce Wayne is a person who essentially has answered that question, I'm never going to be safe, so I better take matters into my own hands.
Rachel, this man killed my parents. I cannot let that pass.
You have the ultimate psychological moment of Batman. They're in the courtroom where his parents' murderer is on trial, and he has a gun in his pocket, and he has to decide whether or not to use it.
There is a member of the Wayne family here today. Has he got anything to say?
That's the character's moment of growth and judgment.
When people experience a traumatic event, it often calls into question fundamental beliefs they have. And this is the way that trauma can be a very powerful, positive force in inducing growth. With Bruce Wayne, he became dedicated to avenging, not revenging, but avenging his parents' death and protecting innocent people from criminal acts. And many people, in fact, who have experienced the trauma go on and become social activists in some way.
What are you seeking? The means to fight injustice, to turn fear against those who prey on the fearful.
His strength derives really from this extraordinary motivation he has through the tragedy of his parents' death and his attitude to it. And so you're looking at a character who has embarked on this crusade to fight crime.
When bringing the character of Bruce Wayne to the screen in Batman Begins, director Christopher Nolan found an unusual psychological parallel in a real-life historical figure, the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt.
Chris said, to me, the key to understanding the character is that Bruce Wayne is Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt's father was New York City's great patrician benefactor. He started the Museum of Natural History. He was one of the founders of the Children's Aid Society. And there's a similarity to Thomas Wayne, who was the great philanthropist of Gotham City.
People less fortunate than us have been enduring very hard times. So we built a new, cheap public transportation system to unite the city.
Like Bruce Wayne, Teddy goes through deep family tragedy. His mother and wife die on the same day. He goes off to the Dakota Badlands, probably to kill himself. Reforges himself in that situation and comes back and becomes this insane police commissioner bicycling through the city in the middle of the night. He's the Rough Rider, what we know as the iconography of Teddy Roosevelt. That's really the psychology that plays out in Bruce Wayne.
Your anger gives you great power, but if you let it, it will destroy you.
In the comic book histories, the timely appearance of a bat in Bruce's study gave him the idea for a crime-fighting alter ego that could avenge his parents' death. Originally called the Batman by creator Bob Kane, this second identity was inspired by popular characters like Zorro and the Shadow, wealthy crusaders who cloak their crime fighting behind a secret other self. In Batman Begins, the motives for Bruce's transformation are more psychologically based.
People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. But as a symbol.
What symbol?
Something elemental, something terrifying.
In the film, Bruce chooses to adopt the appearance of a bat because it's a creature that embodies one of his greatest fears.
The symbolism of using the bat is he's conquered those fears. And there's a technique that mental health clinicians use for people who have fears. It's called exposure. And the idea is in a planned and purposeful way, you expose yourself to the things that you're afraid of. The movie portrayed exposure incredibly well. He stays with the fear until he calms down and sees that he's okay. It's just a wonderful example of how people become afraid of things and they can become unafraid of them.
The murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne instilled a sense of purpose in the life of their orphaned son. But as Batman, that life is far from easy. And each day, Bruce Wayne's psyche is divided between his normal self and his secret identity, which raises a fascinating question. Who is the real person? Bruce Wayne or Batman?
People are dying, Alfred. What would you have me do?
Endure, Master Wayne. Take it. They'll hate you for it, but that's the point of Batman. He can be the outcast. He can make the choice that no one else can make. The right choice.
For decades, Batman fans have embraced a hero whose character would unnerve us in reality. A man divided between his daytime life as a philanthropist and businessman and his nighttime crusade as a masked avenger who operates outside the law.
He is trying to integrate this ever-going conflict that he has between good and evil with the person that he thinks he is, more importantly, the person he wants to be.
In the early 20th century, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung explored the link between the conscious and the unconscious mind. Jung believed that in all of us, a struggle wages between the socially acceptable self and what Jung called the shadow side.
Batman embodies the shadow side. He looks like evil, he operates like an evil guy.
Where are you?
Here. He operates outside society, and yet his values are the values of a virtuous man. He is a perfect union of the two sides of all of us, the good and the evil that coexist in human life.
Theatricality and deception are powerful agents. You must become more than just a man in the mind of your opponent.
In the film Batman Begins, Bruce's choice to take on the identity of a bat not only taps into his own childhood fears, but into the fear most people have about the flying creatures.
In popular culture, a bat is a threat. It comes out at night. It's something you can't really see, but it can bite you, can suck your blood.
So what Batman does is take the iconography of evil. Look at medieval paintings of devils, demons. They have often horns and bat wings. Bats in every culture except the Chinese that I know about are symbols of evil, of the dark side, of death, of Satan. And that fascinates us. People are always fascinated by evil. Partially, I think, because it's an unacknowledged part of every one of us. And Batman puts that in your face.
Why bats, Master Wayne?
Bats frighten me. This time my enemies shared my dread.
History has a lot of examples of people taking symbols that are initially negative, initially hateful even, and getting ownership of them. In the Nazi era, homosexuals were branded or forced to wear a pink triangle. Well, in recent decades, the pink triangle has become a symbol of liberation for homosexuals. Bruce Wayne's done the same thing. He's taken a symbol of all that is scary, unpredictable, and chaotic in the night, in the world, and owned it.
By the same token, you could say that the choice of a bat, which is able to soar above society, upwards towards the heavens, represents this aspirational purpose or dynamic that seems to be motivating his behavior.
Well, well, you took my advice about theatricality a bit literally.
He's created this symbol, and that symbol can't have limits. He can't show weakness ever. And so you have the fight between what is good for Bruce Wayne and what is the right thing to do for Batman, and the two of them are not always compatible.
Of course, there are other ways of channeling anger and loss, like psychotherapy.
Well, why doesn't Batman just go into therapy? Why does Bruce Wayne just go into therapy and then be cured of Batman? The reality is that the Batman persona is the true persona, in our opinion, the way we handle the stories, and that Bruce Wayne is the mask.
Batman's just a symbol, Rachel.
No, this is your mask. Your real face is the one that criminals now fear.
Which is the true man? The Bat or Bruce Wayne? Since the birth of the superhero era, a lot of psychologists have talked about the multiple roles that we play in everyday life. There's an identity that we play with our spouses, identity we play with the coworkers who work beneath us, and the coworkers who work above us.
For Batman, you've got the billionaire playboy, which I think most people would say is not the real person, and that's just a persona, it's an act. Then you've got Bruce Wayne when he's not playing the playboy, and then you have Bruce Wayne when he's wearing the Batman costume. They're facets of the same core personality.
Which is the real identity? Is it Bruce Wayne or is it Batman? And I think that the really cool answer, of course, would be to say, oh, it's Batman. But I think that that misses the point. What defines the character is the essential humanity that Bruce Wayne possesses.
You are my greatest student. It should be you standing by my side, saving the world.
I'll be standing where I belong. Between you and the people of Gotham.
The core of his identity always remains Bruce, because it's his formative experience as Bruce that fuels both. Batman is a tool he puts on to accomplish what he needs to do.
If Batman's true personality remains a subject of debate, so do his motives for fighting crime. History and fiction are filled with figures who remind us that one person's hero is another person's vigilante.
In the letter of the law, Batman is a vigilante. He has identified the white and the black, the right and the wrong, and lives by that code much more strictly than anybody else does. Laws are open to interpretation. Batman's law is not.
Where were the other drugs going?
I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
We have always glorified various vigilantes, whether we're talking about Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. There is this persona that makes us feel good. The problem is that when we start engaging those behaviors in an organized society, in a way that allows the citizenry to make a determination about who should be punished and how and when, we run the risk that their idea might not match up with the idea of the masses.
What he's doing is really outside the law. But as a citizen of Gotham, he really didn't have any choice because the law was so corrupt, he couldn't work within the law. But on the other hand, Batman has one rule. He will not take a life.
I will not become an executioner.
He's got systems that he orders his behavior by to try and restrain his natural instinct for violence or for revenge or whatever dark impulses that drive him.
A lot of what makes him Batman is the ability to control himself, to be able to be disciplined. In many situations in life, success requires that we regulate our impulses. Somebody drives into a parking space ahead of us, and instead of ramming into him, which I love to do, I suppress that. I exert self-control. Self-regulation is like a muscle. We have, all of us, a muscular ability to regulate our impulses. Bruce Wayne is a man who's developed that muscle. He has worked that muscle out. So now he has a stronger capacity for self-regulation than anyone else. That's almost his superpower, the power of self-control.
If you finally learn to do what is necessary, I won't kill you.
Occasionally, Batman's critics have accused him of suffering from a hero complex, an obsessive compulsion to help others and right wrongs, as defined by psychologist Carl Jung.
Batman has this obsession with keeping things under control and making sure that the law is obeyed and that the innocent are not hurt. but his obsession leads him to pretty much cut out from his life anything that doesn't add to his mission as Batman.
He's obsessive compulsive about that. I bought a story once where he's in the middle of an important business meeting, and it's late in the afternoon. He's discussing $1 million business, and he stops paying attention, and he's simply watching the sun go down. And the second the sun vanishes behind the horizon, he goes, "Meeting's over, I gotta go."
He cannot stop being Batman. It's much easier to stop being Bruce Wayne. So once you understand that, then you can understand why he is motivated and why he continues to behave in the way he does.
Batman's behavior includes his choice to deny himself a lasting romantic relationship.
Bruce Wayne's very capable of falling in love. You might even say that's his Achilles heel, almost his kryptonite. He can have the greatest technology in the world, the greatest weapons in the world, but his heart has no shield. His heart can be broken. So if you're Bruce Wayne, falling in love is a very dangerous thing because it's possible that the person that you fall in love with will get hurt as a direct function of that person's affiliation with you.
You look nervous.
He doesn't want to love that openly with the fear that that person might be lost to him the same way his parents were.
This is what makes him a hero. It's easy to make a choice if it has no consequences for you. With Batman, the consequences are monumental, not just life and death, but the kind of life that he lives.
Though Batman recognizes the line dividing justice and injustice, other Gotham creatures of the night see no such distinction.
There's nothing to fear.
And these denizens of darkness relish the chance to perform acts of unspeakable evil.
And here we go.
It's okay. No one's gonna hurt you.
Of course they are.
Crane?
No, Scarecrow.
Their names have become iconic. The Joker, Scarecrow, Riddler, Penguin, Catwoman, Two-Face. In the annals of superhero history, Batman's enemies are the most psychologically scarred, walking definitions of dysfunction, whose vicious deeds often evoke the violent and perverse acts of real-life criminals.
One of the most enduring things about Batman is his rogues gallery, the villains. Because, as I like to say, the rogues define the hero. The greater the threat, the greater the hero.
Demonstrating everything from psychopathology to narcissism, Batman's arch-enemies also offer twisted mirror images of Batman himself.
His villains, like Batman, experienced a tragedy. But he responded by saying, I'm going to spend my life restoring justice to the world. His villains didn't make that choice.
There are plenty of villains that are just as obsessed, but they feel that anything bad that happened to them is something that they need to get payback from the world from, you know. Whereas Batman had the exact opposite point of view. Something bad happened to me, I'm gonna make sure it never happens to anybody else.
Every one of the villains takes what Batman uses as a strength and makes it a weakness. So therefore, Batman sees how his methodologies can go horribly wrong if he goes over a certain line. Penguin is bureaucracy gone bad. If Batman or Bruce Wayne let his foundation be used immorally, he could become what Penguin is.
As depicted in the film The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent, also known as Two-Face, is a prime example of a Batman hero turned tragic villain.
Harvey Dent is one of the great characters from the comics, and he has a fantastically interesting arc because he's somebody who starts out as a good guy. He is a DA.
The night is darkest just before the dawn.
But then a great tragedy happens to him and he becomes something else.
You either die a hero,
No!
or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Harvey Dent ends up being scarred by one of his adversaries and completely loses his mind. And half the time, he's sympathetic and compelling, and the other half, he's as dangerous as a human being can be.
Two-Face is having trouble with the duality, can't reconcile the two halves of himself, has to flip a coin to choose whether to do good or evil. Something freeing about that, also something extremely disturbing, because he's given up his own sense of responsibility because of the coin.
Two-Face could be described as exhibiting a dissociative disorder. A person who literally is giving you two personalities. When someone begins to truly develop an alternative identity or a true alter ego, we move from what may be the normal to something much darker, much more pathologic, in fact, ultimately, quite psychotic.
Other psychological ailments are clearly expressed by many of Batman's villains. The Riddler can't commit a crime without leaving behind a self-incriminating clue, the classic calling card of a narcissist.
Individuals who are narcissistic, they engage in the behaviors because they want to be noticed. You can look at someone like Ted Bundy, who committed a series of homicides, and yet he loved that he could thumb his nose in the face of law enforcement, giving them clues of where bodies were left, pointing in many respects to himself and defying them to catch him. That type of attention-seeking behavior is narcissism.
Would you like to see my mask? I use it in my experiments.
In Batman Begins, the Scarecrow is one of the most terrifying of villains.
These crazies, I can't stand it.
A sadist in the position of power.
Which is your dad.
We meet the Scarecrow as a doctor at Arkham Asylum. He's used that entrusted place to experiment with chemicals and drugs. He enjoys watching people's minds completely snap as a result of the use of it.
There's nothing to fear but fear itself.
Scarecrow uses fear as a tool to ultimately get what he wants, independent of what it might cost others. This is an individual generally not psychotic, but very intense in their need to self-aggrandize.
A individual like the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski, part of his delusions is that mechanization and modernization is ruining the world, and takes it upon himself to send bombs to computer scientists, professors. He became vengeful. I'm going to take it on society, and thus becomes this murderous, crazy person.
Eventually, each Batman villain ends up, however briefly, in Arkham Asylum, Gotham's institute for the criminally insane. But do villains like Scarecrow and Two-Face truly meet the legal definition of insanity?
In every psychiatric text that's published, you will find nowhere on any of its pages the word insane. Because insane is a legal, not a clinical term. And here's the best example of why the public can be so confused. Jeffrey Dahmer. How can a person who kills his victims, cuts them up, has their heads in the freezer, not be crazy? And yet, he did not meet the test of insanity in Wisconsin. The test for insanity is knowing that the act was wrong and not having the ability to conform behavior. He doesn't meet that test. He did it because he wanted to.
While most Batman villains operate under the influence of some form of psychosis, one rival is completely in control of her faculties. The whip-wielding jewel thief Selina Kyle, also known as Catwoman. Over the years, Batman and Catwoman have had a complicated on-again, off-again relationship. But Catwoman's villainous nature hasn't stopped Batman from pursuing her for reasons other than her crimes.
Catwoman is one of the few people in the world who wouldn't be in the kind of danger your average woman would be with Batman. She's as dangerous as he is. So he found someone who was kind of his equal.
Batman's well known to have had a dalliance, and more than a dalliance, with Catwoman,
They have an affinity and a lot in common in terms of dressing up and jumping off rooftops. But ultimately, Catwoman, while not a terrible person, crosses a line that Bruce Wayne and Batman don't cross. Batman still operates within a moral code that's quite strict. So this is the challenge for Catwoman and Batman, as attractive as she is in all of her incarnations. He cannot accept her because even as lines between right and wrong are gray, he still sees those lines and he won't cross them.
Lust, greed, revenge, and a hunger for attention are all compulsions that can lead a human being into a life of crime. But the Dark Knight's deadliest enemy is perhaps the most difficult to fathom.
Armed robbery, double homicide. Got a taste for the theatrical like you.
And to unlock his secrets requires a journey into the ultimate heart of darkness.
A year ago, these cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened?
So what are you proposing?
It's simple. Kill the Batman.
Of all the evildoers in Batman's universe, none is more explosive or unpredictable than the homicidal nemesis known simply as the Joker.
Come on, hit me!
He represents a kind of chaos, of meaninglessness, of randomness, the idea of the character of the Joker, just the luck of the cards.
Here's my card.
Introduced by DC Comics in 1940, the Joker initially had no backstory. Over the years, several versions of his history have been written, describing the character's maniacal metamorphosis. One involves a tragedy, in which the Joker fell into a vat of chemicals and became disfigured as a result. The accident not only changed his appearance, but also twisted his mind.
You don't know what makes him tick. Maybe he won't kill you, maybe he'll hand you a $1,000 bill. He'll probably kill you, but you can't be sure. So in that way, he's a perfect villain for Batman.
Most characters can justify the terrible things they do as, I'm doing this for my family, I'm doing this because the world hates me, I'm doing this because... pick an answer. The Joker does it because I'm as nutty as a squirrel, and I'm proud of that.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with.
Evening, Commissioner.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Let's put a smile on that face.
Most criminals are motivated by the desire to gain greater wealth or gain greater power.
Plus, I have kids to feed. Well, you don't like falafel?
Or to exact some form of revenge. There's a clear motivation which is understandable for what's prompting their behavior. In the case of somebody who's mentally ill, you can't necessarily predict what they're going to do because their motivations are not the normal ones.
For example, an individual such as John Hinckley, who believed amidst his psychosis and narcissism that if he were to assassinate the President of the United States, Jodie Foster would fall in love with him. You see quickly where the logic in that line of thought falls apart.
Why so serious?
And the Joker has an agenda of chaos. He's a unique villain in that he is not even necessarily after money or power or any of those traditional things. So that's really the hardest kind of evil to fight because you can't bargain with it.
Well, hello, beautiful.
In The Dark Knight, the battle between Batman and the Joker is taken to the ultimate level.
A little fighting you. I like that.
Then you're gonna love me.
I always felt, as Batman, that there was a great curiosity about this Joker because he hadn't come across anybody like him before. This is another character like himself who will not compromise whatsoever.
I think the Joker is the logical response to a character like Batman.
Oh, you want to play? Come on.
Partly because Batman, having raised this extremity of behavior in Gotham, you know, he's putting on a mask, tapping into people's fears. And there's all of the technology he employs. He's distinguishing himself to fight crime.
You've changed things. Forever. And why do you want to kill me? I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? No, you complete me.
They are dark reflections of each other. They're both men who operate outside of normal social norms. They're both highly talented, highly gifted at what they do. So they have a lot in common.
Every yin has a yang, every positive has a negative. Batman is sane and logical, uses his mind to solve problems and solve crimes, and the Joker is a complete raving lunatic.
Batman says philosophically, we can acknowledge an imperfect world. We can acknowledge that we have to step outside of social norms, but that doesn't make the social norms meaningless. The Joker says the presence of random injustice means that there is no justice. The fact that innocence can be destroyed means there is no innocence. So your life is a joke. Now, when someone says your life is a joke, that's a challenge. It's not just a physical challenge, it's a moral challenge, it's an intellectual challenge. And Batman can't let that go. Because the Joker isn't just threatening him physically, he's threatening the premise of Batman's existence. That's why it's such an epic discussion that they're having. And of course, it's played out physically, it's played out in fights and punches and gunshots. Ultimately, it's a philosophical conflict, and not one that's easily resolved.
The Joker wants to see that everybody has a price, that nobody is pure, and that even Batman can be bought or can be leveraged in such a way that he would compromise his principles.
Whatever the psychological cause of characters like the Joker, the villains of Batman have given us indelible images of the power of the human mind and its capacity for cruelty.
Everyone has the capacity to do evil, and everyone has the capacity to do good.
Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl talks about the last of the human freedoms. It's the attitude one is going to adopt towards life. That's the fundamental choice that we retain no matter what we are experiencing, no matter where we are. That notion of choice is fundamental to the Batman personality.
I've seen now what I have to become to stop men like him.
Batman represents the incredible power that one enjoys when one consistently chooses the same direction, makes the same choice and the right one, to champion good, to choose to affirm life.
Beyond the thrill of his adventures, Batman gives the world something greater. His internal struggles offer insight into the origins of our own fears, the motivations behind evil acts, and the ways that an ordinary human being can become a hero.
He's human. He's one of the few superheroes that's just a normal guy who's willingly dedicated himself to fighting crime, but it's conceivable that it could be you or me. We don't come from Krypton. We don't have superpowers or mutant genes. Batman is in the realm of obtainable.
I think Batman's the most relatable of superheroes because he's not really technically a superhero. He doesn't have any superpowers except his extraordinary capacity for self-discipline.
He is what we aspire to be in terms of his power, his wealth, the things that he's able to do. And because of that, we identify very heavily with this man who is struggling with the very things that you and I struggle with every day. We try to build upon our strengths, and we try to minimize those things that are weaknesses. We try to figure out what's going on in this crazy world. Batman reflects the full spectrum of emotional angst and joy and sorrow that each and every one of us experience in life.
Bruce is certainly suffering, sacrificing, in many ways, from this character of Batman, who he has unleashed and who he's really unable to rein in anymore.
You're getting lost inside this monster of yours.
I'm using this monster to help other people just like my father did.
Batman does sit on top of this mountain of anger. I think he's more in control of it than he wants his adversaries to think. He wants his adversaries to think that he might lose it at any minute and kill them, you know.
Do I look like a cop?
It works in his favor that you think he's completely unpredictable, which really the Batman myth speaks to. I mean, it's all about where's this thing that I never thought could happen gonna come from? You know, who's gonna step out of the shadows and kill somebody I love?
Some people talk about Batman as a damaged individual, as a person who is still playing out his childhood wounds. I don't find that a very compelling interpretation, because that doesn't make him a hero. If he's damaged, he's less than us. Batman's a hero, he's more than us. I find compelling the interpretation that says, here's a man who faced tragedy, and he made some choices to rise above it. He used that tragedy to improve himself and to improve the world. That is a hero. That makes him compelling.
The appeal of Batman has been in part to the idea that if something that tragic happened to me, would I have that kind of ability to shape my life that way?
I can't tell you how many people who have contacted me and said, I went through tragedy and turned it into a victory. And the Batman's image was ever before my eyes, and I used that image to get myself out of the depths of despair.
He's flying on rooftop!
The best thing about Batman is he's not really a superhero. He's a human.
Like your father, you lack the courage to do all that is necessary.
And he shows us the greatness of what humans can be.
I am gonna stop you.
The reason the Batman is a hero is because he's on our side. He is the balance. He is the cosmic balance to all the insanity.
Hit me!
Batman says, we can make meaning in a difficult world. We can pursue justice in an unjust world. Batman's a character that provides us hope that all of us need.
Gothamites came out in full force today, overrunning polling stations across the city, waiting up to 3 hours in some precincts to cast their votes. News of the record-breaking turnout, though, was eclipsed by yet another story of the masked vigilante known as the Batman. Around 5 p.m., 3 men armed with baseball bats arrived at this polling station, allegedly threatened voters and destroyed Harvey Dent campaign posters. Before the threats escalated, Batman appeared on the scene, quickly disarming each of the men and leaving them beaten and bound to a tree for the authorities. Gotham PD has placed all 3 men under arrest, identifying one of them as Albert Rossi, a reputed member of the Falcone crime family. Good evening, I'm Mike Engel, and this is a special edition of Gotham Tonight, continuing GCN's up-to-the-minute coverage on Election 08. The attack by 3 thugs and subsequent retaliation by Batman captured the media's attention tonight. But tomorrow's headlines will be about Harvey Dent, who posted a resounding landslide victory in the most talked about race in the election, the race for district attorney. Joining us tonight to discuss the turn of events, we welcome Dent's opponents, acting district attorney, Mr. Roger Garcetti, the president of Gotham's Victim Advocate Foundation, Dana Worthington, as well as Alan Sipes, media manager for the Harvey Dent campaign. I thank you all for being here. The race for district attorney was by far the most watched race in the election, but doesn't it seem pointless to elect a district attorney when a vigilante who continues to take the law into his own hands is seen by both the public and the authorities alike as their one and only protector?
Well, that was the case, Mike. How do you explain the voter turnout today? You know, Batman wasn't on the ballot. Harvey Dent was. And in fact, 96% of the people that voted for him said in the exit polls that Dent has come to represent something much more than just a candidate for office. He is the face of a new era in Gotham, one that no longer requires the services of the Batman.
Alan, wouldn't that require the Batman to play along? I mean, who's going to make this guy retire? You? Mr. Garcetti, one of the platforms is to incarcerate the Batman. Now, do you think he's going to just lay down his arms when Harvey Dent takes over?
He may not get a chance. Harvey Dent has almost the entire police department under investigation.
Here we go, Mike. Honestly, this guy is...
Hold on, let's stick to the point. Mr. Garcetti, why do you think the Batman should be brought to justice?
A man who takes the law into his own hands, even in the name of justice, is by definition breaking the law.
No, I don't agree, Mike. I am opposed to the idea of sanctioning the existence of a vigilante, but in desperate times, now, how much of a choice do we have? As you know, I have been president of Gotham's Victims Advocate Foundation going on about 12 years now, and during that period, neither the police nor the DA's office have properly looked after the victims of crime, especially the ones from the lower economic class. These people have only received justice when it was convenient for the city to obtain it.
I guess Miss Worthington forgot that during my term of office, the overall crime rate has dropped significantly.
Excuse me, you can only massage
Let me jump in here. If you look at the numbers, let me
me
jump in here, folks. If you look at the numbers, the incidences of violent crimes, I mean, sex crimes, robberies, assaults, even organized crime activities have declined in the last several months alone. I mean, someone's doing something right out there. Ms. Worthington?
Yes, that's right, and that someone is Batman. Now, since he's appeared in Gotham, I can honestly tell you that the lives of my clients have changed tremendously. Now, no matter how scarred or hurt they may be, they are no longer afraid because they know that he is out there watching over them. I want to know whether Mr. Dent is going to hunt this man down, or is he going to let Batman continue to do the good work that he's doing?
Alan Sipes, is Harvey Dent going to make it a priority to go after the Batman once he's in office?
Well, I got to be honest with you, Mike. Batman is kind of irrelevant at this point. Gotham has its true protector now, and that man is Harvey Dent. This is a man who's not afraid to go after the mob, or any of the other criminals for that matter, without wearing a mask.
He is bold, I'll grant him that. Why the refusal to do interviews, Alan? Why won't Harvey Dent come on the show? What is he afraid of?
He's not afraid of anything, Mike. He's just busy. In fact, you know what he's doing right now? He's in his office working to put Sal Maroni on trial as promised. Now, isn't that exactly what you want from your district attorney?
The only people Harvey Dent has put on trial are the police. Hardworking, innocent cops.
No, Mike, nearly every cop that Harvey Dent has prosecuted has been found guilty, and each of those convictions have led to information on corruption that stems right back to the Falcone crime family, of which Sal Maroni is head, by the way.
The accusation that Sal Maroni is somehow involved with the department is completely unfounded. If there was any evidence to the contrary, I would have indicted Mr. Maroni myself. But Mr. Dent isn't interested in the truth. He just wants to justify his witch hunt into the Gotham PD. A witch hunt that has persecuted the very people who every day put their lives on the line to protect the rest of us. Tell me, Mike, just how effective do you think this new era of Gotham is going to be when the face behind it has alienated the entire police force with his internal affairs investigations? What do you think happens to law and order when you go after the law?
It's a valid point, Mr. Garcetti. Alan, Dent's internal affairs investigations have uncovered corruption within the department. But at what cost? He's going to need these guys pitted against the criminals, right? I mean, not himself.
Mike, this is why I find myself embracing the Batman. Now, Batman has no politics. He has no agenda other than removing the criminals from the streets.
If you want to put on some crazy costume and go declare war on the criminals, well, that's what you're going to get. War. Because the criminal-minded people of this town don't go quietly into the night. If you go after them with violence, they'll come right back at you with more violence.
Well, you should know, Mr. Garcetti.
This guy's more than a costume. Jump in, Alan.
I said you should know, Mr. Garcetti.
Should know what, Alan?
Should know how the criminally minded are going to react to the net that Harvey Dent is tightening around them. It doesn't surprise me that a man like Roger Garcetti can understand how Harvey Dent has made the Gotham PD a stronger police force by rooting out the ring of corruption that threatened to bring it down. Corruption that Mr. Garcetti himself has had a hand hand in.
What did you
now,
say?
Throughout this entire election, Mike, we've endured smear campaigns and character assassinations perpetrated by Mr. Garcetti and his friends, like the ones who tried to threaten our supporters
you're
today.
right on
and
the
never
line.
once did Harvey Dent stoop to his level to retaliate. But now that the election is over, we can reveal that Mr. Garcetti, former chief legal consultant to the Gotham Police Union and trustee to the Filipazzo Community Foundation, both organizations, interestingly enough, with strong ties to Sal Maroni, will be under investigation for misuse of power and acceptance of bribes, and will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
You and your guy better be real careful. You think your white knight doesn't have any chinks in his armor? Well, you think again.
Is that a threat, Mr. Garcetti?
Now you figure it out for yourselves. Now you turn that camera off.
I think we lost Mr. Garcetti.
Well, like I said, Mike, judge and jury, it's a lot less complicated, making it a lot less corruptible.
Well, and so is a man of the utmost integrity, intelligence, and conviction, Dana. You know, when you meet someone like that, you can't help but believe in them. And I believe in Harvey Dent. And I'm very proud to say that Gotham does too.
Well, I will as well if we can get Mr. Dent to come in here and join us on the show. Any chance of that happening, Alan?
Well, I'll do what I can, Mike.
I want to thank all my guests, Roger Garcetti, Dana Worthington, and Alan Sipes. We will, of course, keep you updated on the pending investigation against the former district attorney. In the meantime, join us in 2 weeks as we take a closer look at exactly what Harvey Dent is up against in his war on crime. The mob is one thing, but how will he combat a recent rash of sensational offenses committed by criminals that seem to have no motive at all? And next week, check out our profile on Gotham's most eligible and untamed bachelor, Bruce Wayne, as we try to determine who the real man is behind the one in the headlines. We thank you for watching. More election coverage on the hour. This is Gotham Tonight.
There are movie stars, there are rock stars, and there are sports stars. But there is only one Bruce Wayne. The mega-billionaire playboy is Gotham City's most notable celebrity, whose name is synonymous with extravagance, mischief, and occasional recklessness. Despite his prominent place in the public eye, very little is known about the man who appears to have no causes nor endeavors other than acting as figurehead to his late father's company, Wayne Enterprises. But it's in this position that Wayne has great influence over the entire city. So much influence that stock analysts and business experts are worried that his party boy antics could plunge Gotham into another depression. Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Filingeri, and tonight we explore a wild life that knows no boundaries, hoping to find a man who is ready to start taking some responsibilities.
So he comes to my restaurant, and he's got 6 very pretty ladies with him. I says to him, Mr. Wayne, I know who you are, but I only got 20 tables here, and I'm booked all night. There's nowhere to seat you. He puts a piece of paper in my hand, and he tells me, you make the best risotto in town. It's time for a little expansion, right? I open the piece of paper. It's the deed to the place next door. Mr. Wayne ate very well that night, let me tell you. And now, I got 100 tables to my name.
This is just one of many similar stories about the billionaire who will stop at nothing to get the best seat in the house, the fastest car on the street, and the hottest gals in town. Bruce Wayne lives life like it's a Monopoly board and he's playing all by himself. But it hasn't always been fun and games for the eternal playboy. A moment of unexpected tragedy ruptured his storybook life and set him off on a course that he never thought he would travel. That event was the tragic and violent loss of his parents as a young boy. Born to Thomas and Martha Wayne, young Bruce was born into a life of wealth and extravagance. It was Judge Solomon Wayne who commissioned architect Cyrus Pinckney in 1851 to construct Gotham's financial district. In the center of this district, a merchant house was opened under the name of Wayne Corp. Providing merchants with a variety of goods, the family business became a staple in the flourishing city, generating an endless stream of revenue. Despite the vast family fortune, though, his parents continued to work. His father operated the largest free clinic in the city and used Wayne Enterprises to launch public works projects, like the construction of the city's monorail system. while his mother became a community activist leader and part-time teacher in some of the city's most dangerous areas.
They were Gotham City's patron saints, for sure. The Waynes were not only two of my best friends, but they did so much for charity. And if I could nominate them for sainthood, I would.
Their philanthropy inspired others into action, but just before they could completely help those affected by the ongoing depression, the unspeakable happened. Thomas and Martha Wayne were gunned down outside the Gotham Opera House in front of their 10-year-old son. As the last remaining member of the Wayne family, Bruce became the sole heir of the family's fortune as well as the head of Wayne Enterprises. Custody of the boy was granted to the family's butler, Alfred Pennyworth, who tried tirelessly to calm his young master as he began to act out in response to his parents' demise. When his parents' murderer cut a deal to testify against a Gotham City mob boss and was subsequently assassinated by an alleged mob hitman, Bruce Wayne disappeared without a trace for the better part of 7 years. Various reports had him yachting around the Pacific, while others cited him living in Brazil, owning and operating a local modeling agency. But without any contact or proof of life from the billionaire, reports of his whereabouts dwindled, culminating in the declaration of his death by his trusted guardian, Alfred Pennyworth. In his absence, Wayne Enterprises came under the control of William Earl, who initiated the flotation of the company. In the process of going public, though, Gotham got a big surprise when Bruce Wayne resurrected himself from the dead, just in time to purchase enough stock to become the majority shareholder in the company. Regaining his authority, Wayne secured himself a position as CEO while entrusting all the work and responsibility to Lucius Fox, which many consider the smartest move Wayne ever made. Bruce's return to Gotham seemed permanent as he took up residence in his family's ancestral home, Wayne Manor. However, any thoughts of a newfound maturity quickly subsided with the news of a drunken episode that resulted in the burning down of the palatial estate during a birthday bash. Homeless and forced to relocate, the Playboy has recently landed here, atop this newly built luxury tower, where Wayne has purchased a 2-story, 25,000 square foot penthouse apartment with 40-foot ceilings, 2 gigantic balconies, a parking space for his helicopter, and a 360-degree view of the entire city below. The price? Who knows? But the monthly maintenance fee alone is reported to be around $31,000. The real perk is the location, though. Over the course of the last few months, Bruce has made appearances at all of Gotham's ultra-posh eateries, clubs, and lounges, creating a commotion wherever he goes with a gaggle of gorgeous women in tow. In fact, just last month, escorting all 150 Miss Earth contestants, Bruce accidentally crashed a Harvey Dent fundraising event at the city's newest hotel, the Gotham Grand. Wayne and Dent have never met, but both know Rachel Dawes. An old and loyal friend to Bruce, Rachel has recently become something more to Harvey Dent, as the two have been seen around town together, occasionally holding hands. Whether Bruce approves, no one knows for sure, but Ms. Dawes disapproved of the distraction caused by Wayne's impromptu appearance, asking Bruce to leave the event almost immediately. When asked about the incident and Bruce Wayne, Harvey Dent told reporters,
Look, what happened to Bruce's family? And other people like him, it's unconscionable that a kid should have to endure that in Gotham. A family that's been so good to this town. I'll do whatever I can to prevent something like that from ever happening again.
Later that night, reporters caught up with Wayne at the popular sushi restaurant Raw.
I don't know Harvey Dent. And I try to stay away from politicians, though, you never know what you're going to get with those guys. But if anyone is for abolishing the speeding ticket, they got my vote.
Like him or not, Bruce Wayne is our very own Peter Pan. Armed with a limitless trust fund that acts as his sword, his adventures do make for great headlines in the tabloids. But unlike the mythic boy who never has to grow up, Wayne has real responsibilities that affect us all. Responsibilities that include overseeing Wayne Enterprises, which has been Gotham's economic core for over a century. Over the last few months, Wayne Enterprises has acquired and/or developed technologies emanating from abandoned aerospace and military programs, Programs that have produced specialized fabrics, electromagnetic gyroscopic navigational systems, hemostatic powders, high-tech plastics, radiation stamping technology, and rotor blades made of metal composites that have a low radar signature and special acoustic design. Vice President of Operations, Douglas Fredericks. Is there logic to any of this, or is Bruce Wayne just manufacturing parts for some expensive toys he wants to play with?
Lydia, the space program not only put a man on the moon, but it introduced the world to Velcro.
But we're talking about stealth rotor blades here. I mean, where is the practical use in that?
What some may consider niche or off-the-wall technology, we view as doors to the future, and our strides through those doors will strengthen this company and the community around it.
The jury is still out whether these ventures are helping or hurting the company. In fact, one stock analyst is calling for the board to remove Wayne as CEO before he causes the city to enter into another depression. On the other hand, another analyst is telling investors that Bruce Wayne might be the perfect person to usher Wayne Enterprises into the next generation by taking risks on technology that could change the world for the better. But since it's impossible to tell whether the card up the Playboy sleeve is an ace or just a joker, the future of Wayne Enterprises will remain uncertain. Thanks so much for watching us. Join us in 2 weeks as we profile another one of Gotham's familiar faces, Lieutenant Jim Gordon, head of the newly formed Major Crimes Unit in the Gotham Police Department. And don't miss next week's show when Mike Engel takes us through Gotham City's underworld in an attempt to expose the bizarre criminal elements that pose a threat to us all. I'm Lydia Fillingerry, and this is Gotham Tonight.
Crime. It is as common to a modern-day society as air and water. And as long as there is a group of people who live in want, there will always be individuals willing to do anything they can, rob, cheat, or kill, to satisfy their needs. But in Gotham, crime has started to emanate from a different place. Over the last few weeks, there's been a rise in crimes without motive that are so demented, none of us can understand why they were committed. I'm Mike Engel, and tonight we delve into the city's underground to get a status report on just how bad it is on our streets. Now, we do this not to frighten you. We do this only to inform you of a growing problem that threatens our city. The last thing we want is for you to be in a situation similar to what Steve and Andrea Otis found themselves in with their 17-year-old son.
The police said he took something they call ecstasy. It's supposed to give you a feeling of euphoria. It's still hard for us to believe what happened, especially to a boy like Tim.
Did he ever use drugs before, or was that night the first time?
As far as we know...
It's the only time he ever took drugs, ever.
Steve and Andrea's son, Tim, graduated high school last May and was on his way to a top university when he and his friends celebrated the night away here. Known for lax underage drinking enforcement and an abundance of recreational drugs, teenagers of all kinds came here to experiment with a life that their parents tried so hard to keep them from. That night, it was Tim Otis's turn. Upon ingesting the drug called ecstasy, Tim collapsed to the floor and immediately went into a violent seizure. His friends called an ambulance, fearing that he was suffering from an overdose or a bad reaction. Neither was the case.
After they called us, we rushed to the hospital, and there he was, screaming at the top of his lungs, tied to the gurney. The doctors had to restrain him because Tim kept trying to tear his own eyes out. They couldn't control him. He was terrified.
The family's nightmare was unending, alarming Tim's doctors and the other medical examiners that this was something more than just a bad trip. Theorizing that the drugs may have been laced with a malicious substance, Tim's blood was tested for traces of foreign chemicals. What they found frightened everyone. Tim's bloodstream was laden with the chemical compound used by Dr. Jonathan Crane to produce his lethal fear toxin, the same toxin that nearly destroyed all of Gotham. James Levine writes the police beat for the Gotham Times. He's also written 2 books on the history of organized crime in Gotham and is writing a 3rd on the terrorist attack that occurred in the Narrows. James, this is some scary stuff.
Scary indeed.
Now, before we get into this further and discuss whether Dr. Jonathan Crane is behind it all, let's start off where organized crime stands these days. Harvey Dent recently indicted Sal Maroni, Maroni is allegedly the heir to Carmine Falcone, who was incarcerated and later suffered debilitating psychological damage at the hands of Dr. Crane.
Well, you know, Mike, what's really interesting about all this is that Falcone's removal from power provoked other criminal factions in Gotham to go after pieces of Falcone's empire. Now, Sal Maroni made it clear that this wasn't a good idea. However, Maroni, who prides himself on being a charmer when he's more of a schemer, has reportedly embraced these other criminal organizations rather than declaring war against them.
Embrace them how?
Well, reports suggest that Maroni and the rest of Gotham's criminal factions have banded together. And statistics support this, as there's been absolutely no incidences of violence between these factions in the last couple of months, which is remarkable given the vicious history of organized crime within this city.
James, wait a second. What you're saying then, is this some sort of détente?
No. What I'm saying is some kind of conglomeration. The various factions have joined together to form a larger syndicate, which, to be blunt, is far worse than having them kill each other. Now what you have is a mob on steroids, with their hands in every pot and their fists in every face. Essentially, it's an impenetrable force of highly organized crime, impenetrable even to Batman.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop you right there. This is what gets me mad, okay? Now, to me, the biggest problem facing Gotham right now is the fact that the public is embracing a vigilante as their protector.
You mean the Batman?
Yes, the Batman. I mean, a man who refuses to reveal his identity, a man who isn't even voted upon by the public, a man we don't even know if he's human, James.
What do you think, Mike? He's a bat?
Look, a number of eyewitness accounts have put him at different places at the exact same time. I mean, how do you explain that to the people of Gotham?
Mike, you've been ridiculous.
Let me make my point. The point is, this mega mob that you are telling us is such a threat. My feeling is that the Batman is worse, because before you know it, he's going to inspire the whole city to take the law into their own hands. And what do we have? We have anarchy, complete and utter chaos.
You ever think where we would be without Batman? Now, that would be chaos. Our government has broken its social contract with its citizens, Mike, one that promised justice, order, and security. When that contract is violated, someone needs to rise up and repair it. Batman has.
Now, what about Harvey Dent, James? Can't he do that for the city of Gotham?
Harvey Dent will play a big part in this, but he can't do it alone. This city is facing some major threats. What happened to the Otis kid? Tip of the iceberg.
You bring up a good point. Now, what about this case, James? The police say that Dr. Crane is in fact dead. The situation with these spiked drugs speaks to a very different situation.
Well, what we know is that Dr. Jonathan Crane was in fact involved in the fear toxin assault on the Narrows 9 months ago.
No, come on, everybody knows that Crane is dead.
Mike, his body was never recovered, and the hundreds of Arkham inmates that escaped from the asylum disappeared during the attack.
Now, what happened to them?
No one knows, but there have been several sightings of a man who fits Crane's description leading an army of what is described as truly disturbed people. Now, what leads me to believe these sightings are indeed valid is one recurring detail in them all.
Which is?
The man leading the pack wears a burlap sack over his head, which was part of a scare tactic the doctor implemented on his inmates.
There's certainly some very strange stuff.
A man with 6 fingers is strange, Mike. This is alarming. My only hope is it doesn't get any worse, but when you hear stories like the one about the large shipment of ammonium nitrate that was stolen off the docks last week by a perpetrator who was crazy enough to smile into the surveillance camera, I start to think it's time to move to another city. You have any idea what a lunatic can do with that much ammonium nitrate, Mike?
Well, build a bomb, potentially.
No, build a big bomb.
Let me ask you this in our remaining 30 seconds, James. There is, to me, no doubt here that there's a growing trend of deranged crimes that are being perpetrated by equally deranged individuals for motives that are unknown to us all. Meanwhile, we have a man that's dressed up like a bat who is literally waging war on the city streets. I mean, you don't think one has to do with the other. I mean, that is to say, Batman, whether he's a hero or a nutcase, is encouraging and actually inspiring other nutcases to do what? Either stop him or top him.
Well, I haven't thought about it like that. Potentially, yes.
Well, that's why the Batman's got to be stopped. I mean, he's got to be brought to justice to stop the escalation. James, we thank you for being with us today. And thank you for watching. Please join me in 2 weeks for an interview with the head of the Falcone crime family, Sal Maroni, who claims Commissioner Loeb and the Gotham PD should be the real defendants in Harvey Dent's case against him. And next week, tune into Lydia Filingeri's profile on the rising star within Gotham's police department, Lieutenant Jim Gordon. Will Lieutenant Gordon be the man who will turn this city around? Or does Gordon's rumored association to the Batman cast a shadow of doubt on him that Harvey Dent should be concerned about? I'm Mike Engel. Good evening. This is Gotham Tonight.
In the wake of the devastation that occurred in the Narrows, Gotham PD came under heavy criticism for its poor performance in preventing the terrorist plot to destroy the city. Subsequently, a series of internal affair investigations headed up by Harvey Dent, now District Attorney Harvey Dent, revealed a pervasive level of corruption throughout the department. In desperate need of a facelift, Police Commissioner Loeb lobbied City Hall to create an elite investigative unit solely dedicated to solving the major crimes plaguing Gotham City. The request was granted on the condition that the unit was to be led by an officer with an exemplary history of duty and the proven ability to get the results. That man is Lieutenant Jim Gordon. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lydia Filingeri, and tonight we profile Gotham's top cop, examining his rise to power and his current command over the elite major crimes unit. Does Gordon really have what it takes to protect this city? Or will his rumored relationship with the masked vigilante known as the Batman demand the new district attorney to investigate the last honest cop on the force? The morning after the deadly chemical attack on the Narrows that infected thousands of residents and policemen, set free hundreds of dangerous Arkham Asylum inmates, and also provoked riots that lasted for weeks as authorities fought to regain control of the island. Batman was praised for thwarting the unknown terrorist group, while the Gotham police brass were condemned for their handling of the disaster, particularly for the decision to raise the bridges, preventing safe exits off the island. Commissioner Loeb sidestepped charges of negligence by detailing the heroism of one of Gotham's finest, who valiantly led the rescue effort in the Narrows and helped Batman stop the train that threatened to poison all of Gotham with the lethal fear toxin. A 15-year veteran of the Gotham Police Department, Jim Gordon was awarded citations of valor and bumped up to lieutenant for his efforts that night. Gotham embraced the husband and father of two as one of their own, and Gordon's family understands why.
If he didn't feel he could keep us safe, if he didn't feel he could help the city and keep himself safe, he would resign. That's the kind of man he is. He wouldn't try to do a job he didn't think he was up to do. The city needs him, and he knows it.
Gordon's clean record and unbreakable determination make him widely considered as the modern-day Elliot Ness, generating for the first time in a long time good press for a police force desperately in need of it. The good press quickly went south, though, when then Assistant District Attorney Harvey Dent spearheaded multiple internal affairs investigations into Gotham PD. Among the several indicted and later convicted was Gordon's former partner, Detective Flass, provoking outrage among the department.
I don't condone the actions of the officers who were convicted. But if I showed you how much the city allows me to pay them, you might understand why somebody may slip from time to time. But rather than acknowledge that problem, though, Dent likes to make waves by saying that the whole institution is corrupt. Well, I doubt he'll have any complaints about my decision to give Jim Gordon MCU. He's the perfect man for the job. Now, if you don't mind, I got a meeting to run to. Excuse me.
Anointing Gordon as the head of Major Crimes Unit restored credibility to the department. City leaders brandished the new division the incorruptible arm of law enforcement. The recent months have challenged that notion, though, as Gordon and MCU have yet to solve any cases while conducting some curious investigations. Although Harvey Dent is not exploring the matter at this time, a leak from his camp stated that many within MCU have been considered persons of interest. Are those persons of interest detectives handpicked by Gordon, or Gordon himself, who may or may not be working in conjunction with the Batman? Seen numerous times in the sky above Gotham, look close enough and one can make out the symbol of a bat. The source of the light emanates from the rooftop of Major Crimes, which some believe acts as Gordon's personal beacon to the masked vigilante. Gordon has a different explanation, though.
Faulty lighting equipment. I've been trying to fix it myself. But don't tell my wife that. She's been bugging me to change the bulbs in the basement for weeks.
Gordon may jokingly pass off his rumored alliance with the Batman, but if there's any truth to it, then it's hardly a laughing matter in the light of recent murders of two Sal Maroni associates. Last Wednesday morning, two teachers and a group of second graders discovered the dead bodies of Romeo Camera and Steve Rizzolio bound, gagged, and tied to opposite ends of a seesaw. If you wanted to know where the mob keeps its money, these are the guys you want. Could the Batman, hailed by some while abhorred by others, have crossed the line in waging his war against the mob? And most important, If Gotham's top cops encounters with a man who remains on Gotham's most wanted list is the beginning of some sort of partnership, then the incorruptible arm of law enforcement may have just snapped. If that is the case, then all this city may have left is Harvey Dent. Thanks for watching. Join us again in 2 weeks for the first televised interview with the newly elected District Attorney Harvey Dent, who will answer Mike Engel's questions and yours about how he plans to make the streets safer for all of us. Up next week, though, tune in to what will likely be an explosive debate between the head of the Falcone crime family, Sal Maroni, and commander of the Gotham Police Department, Commissioner Loeb. While the commissioner is now cooperating with Dent's mission to stamp out corruption within Gotham PD, Maroni contends the DA's case against him is a poor attempt to make him the fall guy for the rampant corruption that still exists. We'll find out which is the truth on Gotham Tonight. I'm Lydia Fillingerry. Good night.
Harvey Dent has wasted no time implementing his agenda since taking office, kicking off with the trial against Sal Maroni. The district attorney has built a strong case against the mobster and the alleged head of the Falcone crime family by forcing former district attorney Roger Garcetti to turn state's evidence against Maroni in exchange for immunity. Although this testimony seems damning, Garcetti said that he never received orders directly from Maroni. Commands came from an intermediary who is reputed to be a Maroni associate named Albert Rossi. If Dent can get the mobster to attest to being the middleman between Garcetti and Maroni, Dent can effectively tie Maroni to the ring of corruption within Gotham PD. If not, testimony from a corrupt public servant looking for a way out of some jail time will probably not be enough for a conviction. To discuss this further tonight, we are joined by the defendant himself, Mr. Sal Maroni, who claims to be an innocent man caught in the middle of a nasty fight between the DA's office and the police department. And since this case highlights once again the rampant corruption within the Gotham Police Department, we also welcome Police Commissioner Loeb to speak on behalf of Gotham PD.
Good evening.
Mr. Maroni, Commissioner Loeb, thank you both for joining us.
Pleasure, Mike. Big fan.
Thank you. So, Mr. Maroni, you seem very at ease for someone who's on trial.
Well, innocence calms the soul. Know what I'm saying?
Now, you contend that you've had absolutely no influence over the police. I mean, you haven't bribed any union officials or officers.
I've given them money, sure.
You have?
Of course. I donate to the policeman's ball every year, Mike. Now, what the commissioner's pals do with that money, that's up to them. Hey, Loeb. Fun party this year.
Mike, let me make something clear here. The policeman's ball is thrown on behalf of officers killed in the line of duty. Proceeds go to their families. It is strictly a charitable event.
You see, Mike, I'm just a charitable guy.
Mr. Maroni, Roger Garcetti's testimony has painted a pretty detailed picture of your ties to Gotham PD. Now, are you claiming that this is a total and complete fabrication?
Mike, I'm just a man minding my own, caught in a crossfire between Mr. Dent and the boys in blue. Now, if you ask me, I think these accusations are absurd. And as a taxpayer of this incredible city, I'm a little ticked off at the amount of money they spent dragging me into court when they could have spent the same money on a homeless shelter or, you know, something. But those kind of things don't make headlines, know what I'm saying?
Commissioner Loeb, as much as this is a trial against Sal Maroni, it's also yet another trial against the Gotham Police Department and its corruption.
Well, see, I was initially critical of Mr. Dent's internal affairs investigations as they were bad for the morale of my men. But now, the department is working in full cooperation with the district attorney's office to isolate any members of the department that continue to violate the code of the Gotham PD. Now, in doing so, I believe we will root out the corruption and properly cleanse ourselves from the influence of men like Mr. Maroni there.
Now, any of those you've isolated have ties to Mr. Maroni, Mr. Loeb?
Well, I'm not at liberty to say right now.
That's funny, ain't it, Mike? I mean, these cops, they go around robbing, cheating, and stealing. And this guy, the top cop, he still got a job. Talk about corruption, huh? Who's scratching your back, Chief?
You laugh all you want, Maroni. You see, I don't itch.
Yeah, right.
Now, one of Dent's key witnesses, Albert Rossi, is also an alleged associate of yours. I mean, who's going to be testifying as a go-between between you and Mr. Garcetti. I mean, how do you feel about that, Mr. Maroni?
And I can pull a guy off the street for 2 bills and a handshake who will testify that you are the Batman, Mike. That don't make it so, does it?
So what you're saying is that Mr. Rossi is not an associate of yours?
Mike, who do you think I am?
I'll tell you who he is. The head of the Falcone crime family.
The head of the Falcone crime family? This guy's got what Dent's got, a big imagination. I'm in the import-export business, Mike, that's all.
The import-export business?
Yeah. Not everybody can be Bruce Wayne. I mean, some of us, we got to work for a living, know what I'm saying?
Now, how do you respond then to the surveillance tapes that were leaked last week that detailed apparently the abduction of 2 mob bagmen who were later found murdered?
Tragic. Tragic. My condolences to their families.
Mr. Maroney, before they were ambushed, they spoke about your decision to band together with other criminal organizations in Gotham.
Well, we work in a global economy, Mike, for Pete's sake. I mean, I do business with all kinds of people. Chechens, Asians, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Arabs, more Arabs. Unfortunately, I find out sometimes these guys aren't always on the up and up. And when I find this out, I don't do business with those guys no more. Know what I'm saying?
So you're not overseeing a criminal syndicate in Gotham, and this is actually just business?
Mike, you're repeating yourself. You got nothing else interesting to talk about? I'm sure the viewers at home are turning off their TVs right now. I mean, you don't want to bore them to death, do you?
No, we don't. Commissioner, do the police have any leads in relation to the murders of the 2 men on their surveillance tapes?
Well, Mike, I'm expecting a report on the investigation soon.
Has Batman been considered a suspect at this point?
Mike, that is an interesting question. Oh, Jimbo Gordon got a real thing for the guy, don't he?
Jim Gordon is the most honorable cop we have on the force.
I never said he wasn't the most honorable cop on the force, but hey, Chief, what's that saying right now?
You see, Mike, this man would like nothing more than to cast suspicion on an honest cop who was actively shutting down all the various money laundering operations in the city, making it much harder for Mr. Maroney to bank his ill-gotten gains.
Oh, so now I'm a money launderer. Great. What's next? You gonna finger me for kidnapping a Lindbergh baby? Mike, do me a favor. Turn this guy off.
Commissioner, are you saying that Mr. Maroney is the target of recent money laundering crackdowns?
We have reason to believe that all of Gotham's dirty money leads back to Mr. Maroney.
Save yourself a disappointment. Go through your officers' wallets. You'll find most of it there. Mike, you gonna let this guy insult your journalistic ethics?
How so at this point, Mr. Maroney?
By spouting this garbage.
I'm simply, on behalf of Gotham City News, presenting both sides of the argument. That's what the segment's about.
This is not an argument, Mike. This is a persecution.
No, I don't think so, actually.
No, you don't think, Mike. You know what? I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna think for you.
Oh, yeah?
Here's what's going on. Pretty boy Dent and Baldy over here,
Baldy.
they're trying to set me up like some kind of patsy. Well, guess what? I ain't no patsy. What I am is late. I got a date. We gotta wrap this up, okay? Before it sounds more and more like dead air.
Well, we're about out of time anyway.
Good. Say goodnight.
Commissioner Loeb, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Mike, and I just want to say we'll have our day in court. You enjoy yourself there when you get there, Mr. Maroney.
Mr. Maroney, we thank you as well for joining
My
us.
pleasure.
On today's
How do I
show.
get this thing off me? Can somebody get this off
And
me?
thank you for joining us. Please join us next week when the first televised interview with newly elected District Attorney Harvey Dent, who will both answer your questions and mine about his plans to make the streets safer. In the meantime, take care and have a good night. Thank you for joining us. This is Gotham Tonight, and I'm Mike Engel. Recently elected District Attorney Harvey Dent has already begun waging his war on crime. The first assault made his opponent in the race for District Attorney, Roger Garcetti, surrender unconditionally and turn state's evidence against the head of the Falcone crime family. This testimony paved the way for what will be Dent's first major battle, the trial of Sal Maroney. Will Gotham's White Knight broaden the front on his war on crime to benefit the city? Or will he only dedicate himself to conflicts that make for good headlines? Good evening, I'm Mike Engel, and this is Gotham Tonight. We're joined tonight by District Attorney Harvey Dent, who has graciously taken time out of his busy schedule to not only answer my questions, but yours as well. So let's start, shall we?
Why don't we start with the question that you posed in your opening, Mike? Am I an advocate for Gotham or just a publicity hound?
Well, that wasn't exactly how I put it, but...
If I was after headlines, Mike, I would do more press, wouldn't I? I mean, weren't you the one who was criticizing me for not doing the interviews during the election?
Well, that's true, yeah.
Okay, then here's an answer to your question. Whatever decisions I make as district attorney will be made with Gotham's best interest in mind. The moment I fail to do that, no matter the circumstances, is the moment I become everything I stand against.
Corruption, brutality, total disregard for the law.
To name a few, yes.
Well, couldn't you ascribe those qualities to the Batman?
Batman? Isn't that a little off point?
No, I disagree, actually. I mean, I'm dumbfounded personally by the notion that a man who continues to take the law into his own hands, making a mockery of it altogether, is tolerated by both the public as well as the authorities. I guess the question we all want answered is, will you make this a priority to bring him to justice?
Well, my priority is to help this city return to a time when it didn't need a Batman. when the streets were safe and the institutions of government were right-minded.
That sounds like good spin.
It's not spin. You don't just decide one day to go put on a disguise and go fight crime. A dysfunctional society dictates that response. So if you want to get rid of the Batman, then curing what created him is the best way.
I understand that, but what if you sanction a vigilante to act as a guardian for society? I mean, someone who willfully breaks the law, then aren't we in fact sanctioning lawlessness and chaos in the city?
If the Batman bent the law to achieve some personal gain, you would have a much easier time to get people to agree with you, Mike. Batman's actions thus far have been everything but personal. They've benefited the city entirely.
How do we truly know what he's after if we don't get an opportunity to ask him?
Well, let's just say there are plenty of other people who are acting out of personal gain that I'm more interested in getting to know.
You mean people like Sal Maroni, I assume?
Yes.
Well, since the trial's in progress, Mr. Dent, we obviously understand that you can't discuss the details of it at this point. So I'd like to open up the conversation to a couple of callers at this point, if you don't mind.
Sure thing.
So on line one, we have Marcia Dolinsky from Uptown. Marcia, you on the air?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Dent. I'm a huge supporter of yours.
Thank you, Marcia.
I used to live in the Narrows, and I was fortunate enough to make it out okay during Dr. Crane's chemical attack. Now I hear Crane may be out there spreading the toxin again. What can you do to stop this?
Well, what I will do is reopen the investigation into Crane's whereabouts. If Crane is dead like the authorities say, then we need to find a body. I don't think you will, so I'm inclined to believe that he is out there, and finding him will be imperative.
Now, Dr. Crane's alleged poisoning of the drugs in Gotham is clearly just another offense, and what we're seeing that it's a series of really bizarre and sensational crimes being perpetrated these days. How do we counteract something that appears to have no known motive?
Well, as demented as it may be, I think the motive is to hurt people. And that's why this crime will be stopped, and the perpetrators will be brought to justice.
Caller 2, Brendan Palmer from River South. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I'm a cop, 16th Precinct, and you talk about bringing criminals to justice. How are we, the police, how are we going to do that? When you got your hands wrapped around our throats, you locked up 6 of my friends already with your IA crap.
Well, tell me their names. Tell me their names and I'll tell you why I prosecuted them. I understand that a decrease in manpower makes it harder for you to do your job, but working with a group of individuals who break the law instead of enforcing it, that makes your job impossible. And to be honest with you, Officer Palmer, I feel a lot safer knowing that someone like yourself, whose name hasn't shown up in a file on my desk, is out there on the streets protecting me. You're a good cop.
Albert Rossi and 2 others were apprehended by the Batman before they could assault voters at a local polling station. You're putting Rossi on the stand tomorrow to testify that he was a go-between for Sal Maroni and Roger Garcetti, now effectively tying the mob to the corruption within Gotham PD, as well as the violence against your own campaign for district attorney.
Well, that's the aim.
Aren't you opening up old wounds? I mean, from previous internal affairs investigations, I mean, that convicted huge numbers of the police department.
Mike, my intention is not to cast suspicion over the entire Gotham Police Department. But when the corruption is so widespread, you have to go down there and dig down deep and root it out. Sal Maroni's conviction tomorrow, hopefully, would be the beginning of the end of that process.
What is your working relationship with the police department right now?
Commissioner Loeb was initially critical of my position. But now our offices are working close together, and there are several other police officials who are out there doing a good job, whom I trust.
Like Lieutenant Jim Gordon and his major crimes unit that we're hearing about.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to meet yet, Lieutenant Gordon and I, but I am familiar with his work, particularly in cracking down on the city's money launderers, which my office is aggressively prosecuting, and I anticipate sitting down with him soon.
Will you discuss his rumored relationship with the Batman that we're hearing about?
Mike, you're obsessed. Next caller.
I'm sorry to interrupt right now, but we've been informed of some breaking news here in Gotham. My colleague Lydia Filangiari is reporting outside Gotham National Bank, where we're hearing that 6 men have robbed apparently $68 million out of the bank's vault. Lydia, what's the situation down there? Doesn't look like you're close to the bank.
That's right, Mike. We're a couple of blocks away from Gotham National. Authorities still have a perimeter set up around the area because the bank robbers apparently used grenades to intimidate the hostages into submission. Now there's fear more explosives may be inside.
What is the status on the 6 bank robbers at this point?
5 out of 6 of them are dead inside the bank. 4 took gunshots to the body, and 1 was hit by a school bus that the last robber then used to get away with the money.
Any identification on the perps?
Lydia, have any of the assailants been identified at this point, do we know?
No, there's been no reports on what the bank surveillance footage reveals, but according to eyewitnesses, each man wore a clown mask. So there's been no identification thus far. We're still waiting to hear more.
Okay, Lydia, we certainly thank you. Please keep us updated.
Of course.
And we'll be tracking that story on Gotham Tonight. Well, Mr. Dent, you certainly have your hands full in this city. We certainly wish you all the luck, and we appreciate you being here tonight.
Mike, putting pressure on the criminals so they think twice before committing awful crimes like this. That's our goal. And luck is our last resort.
We thank you for coming on, Mr. Dent. And we thank you for watching. Please join me next time for an interview with Mayor Garcia, who will detail his plans to clean up the city. What will his relationship be like with Harvey Dent? How will he administrate the police, and will he vow to incarcerate the Batman or allow him to roam the streets, taking the law into his own hands? We'll find out on Gotham Tonight. So good night, everyone. Please stay safe.